Good morning, good afternoon. This is an exciting day for me because I'm having the opportunity to talk with a longtime friend and expert on many things. I'm Earl Adams Jr. I'm a partner here at Hogan Levels, based in the Washington, D.C. office in our transportation group. Uh, just recently arrived, having served in the Biden administration as the deputy administrator at the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, the U.S. Department of Transportation. Going to be talking about an issue that has the potential of rocking the autonomous vehicle space in the U.S. And just in general connected cars as we're looking at the next generation of vehicles that are on U.S. roadways. Let me let you, DL. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thanks, Earl. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is DL McNeal. I'm the managing director of Longview Global, a boutique advisory firm here in Washington, D.C. In the previous life, I was at the Obama administration's DoD in the Office of Secretary of Defense, Asia Pacific Security Affairs Division, and the deputy director of the Brookings China Center. But today, I'm here with my good friend, Mr. Adams, to talk about something that actually intersects both of our worlds. That's transportation and national security.
And it's been a long time, DL. That we have been friends, and this is really one of the first opportunities where we see that real intersection. So thank you for your willingness to sit down and talk to me about it. And we're gonna see if you and I can solve this problem, and and then send it out to the world, and hopefully the rest will follow. But as I said, we're talking about the Department of Commerce, the Bureau of Industry and Security, which back in March issued what's called an ANPRM, an Advance Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, specifically around connected vehicles and information technology. And what an ANPRM does is it actually puts out to the world, to the public, that notice that a department is actually considering a rulemaking around a set of issues. And what they do is they propose questions, and they allow for the public to give feedback and to respond, and that then helps shape their information. I mean their understanding of the issue and the information that they have. And then sometimes, and it seems like in this instance it has occurred, from that ANPRM, it then moves into where the department decides to actually that a rulemaking is appropriate. And in this case, as we know, several news outlets have reported that the Department of Commerce, BIS division, has decided to put forth what's called a notice of proposed rulemaking, to publish an NPRM, effectively banning all forms of software that is produced in China in vehicles, both just what we call them connected vehicles or with self-driving autonomous vehicles that are operating in the U.S., which is as I said at the top, potentially very big issue for the automotive sector. And now there is no, to date, there's no publication yet for this NPRM. Effectively, one might even say that this was leaked information, but we'll see what according to Reuters and a few other news outlets, within the coming weeks, we're going to see this NPRM out on the street. What then occurs is from that NPRM, again, it sort of frames the issues that the department believes need to be addressed. It still puts out perhaps one or two questions, but there's an opportunity for the public then to respond, to give comments to the NPRM, to the frame that the NPRM has sort of established. But from there, within 60 to 90 days after the NPRM is published, a rule will actually become final, and we'll perhaps be in a situation where all software technology in connected or autonomous vehicles may be banned. So, my question to you, Dio, I mean, what's your thoughts and reactions to that?
Well, Earl, I think you did a great job of laying out the process here. Let me talk a little bit about what I think the administration is concerned about with respect to national security. And the administration believes, and some people will say rightfully so, that connected vehicles, autonomous vehicles, and that class of vehicle presents a real national security challenge. And largely that's because they believe that all manner of espionage can take place in these types of vehicles. Network and cyber attacks are possible with these types of vehicles. Something that we call sensitive infrastructure mapping and monitoring could take place with these vehicles, particularly with U.S. sensitive facilities, military bases, missile sites, and the like. And what the administration really focuses on here are two things. One is the connectivity, right? These vehicles being able to connect to the Internet of Things and its capacity for vacuuming up data. So the data collection that these types of vehicles will allow. Now, what's important for me, and you and I have had this conversation quite a bit, is when we focus in on data, there are two things I think that we have to disaggregate. Yes, they are related, but they are different in this context. One is data privacy. That's one issue. And data security. Now, why does that matter in this context? There is a legitimate, some would say, discussion and argument going on about data privacy. So whether or not companies should be collecting this much data on consumers anyway, that's one issue. But then the question of data security is, given that that is happening, once you've collected that data, how then can it be used? And in this case, how can it be weaponized, right? So
Yeah.
that's the security question, right? And so, yes, people will say, well, why not target any number of American companies if you're concerned about data? Well, that's a data privacy question. What we don't think is that Google is going to use this to create some sort of a cyber network attack
Yeah.
against the U.S. homeland or try
Yeah.
and shut down an infrastructure piece. So that's a security aspect. And that's what makes China in this case, although to be fair, the notice for proposed rulemaking talks about adversarial countries in general. So
General, right. Right.
Russia, North Korea, Iran, but really here, I mean, let's be clear.
Talking about, yeah, we're talking about China. Yeah.
China with the
Yeah.
capabilities.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so those are the questions. And look, I think one of the things that we have to really focus on as we talk to clients about this
Yeah.
is understanding what is in these vehicles. So
Yeah.
coming to what makes a Chinese vehicle different from a Ford F-150 Lightning, for example. Well, the question is one, how is your data secured and how can you use it and weaponize it? But in this case, what the administration is saying is there's actually nothing different between a BYD and a Ford F-150 Lightning if all the software running it is the same, right? And so
Yeah.
we got to focus in on what's in these vehicles with respect to software and then where that data is stored, how it's used, and how it can be weaponized. So
Yeah.
to answer your question, it's a real national security concern for sure. And
Yeah.
then what we do about it, what companies do about it, well, that's the real question that this NPRM is trying to get at.
No, I definitely agree with you, and I think that it's an interesting, um, you know, I've oftentimes laid out that within the autonomous vehicle space, in particular, when you look at that regulatory scheme, you have a situation. We have multiple agencies that are tasked with overseeing it, and so Commerce and DoD are looking at it from a national security competitive perspective, whereas the agency that I just came from, Department of Transportation, we're looking at this from a safety perspective. And sometimes the interests are aligned where national security concerns can be perfectly aligned with safety concerns. Sometimes there maybe is a little bit of a distance. One news report did definitely account for Secretary Buttigieg noting that he's concerned about the national security implications of connected vehicles when it comes to Chinese software. But at its core, DOT is a safety organization, and that question about what's in the vehicle, what is the software? That's actually the thought that I have. As a former regulator, it is this question of, can a developer disaggregate, this software? I'm not an engineer, so perhaps it is possible, but ultimately, if as developers have been, engineering their AV vehicles for the last, anywhere from 5 to 10 years, and developing those algorithms, is it possible that some of that source code is coming from, sources from China? On the hardware side, we definitely know that's the case, and so when you look at the software and the ability to disaggregate, my concern is that if this rule, absent some sort of framing, massaging, that it could create a challenge for developers, which ultimately will lead to, issues when it comes to deployment. That is something that I was a very big proponent on, is that, from a rulemaking standpoint, provided that we can establish a baseline of safety, the rule should never, limit or impact the ability for deployment to occur. And so if this issue, if this approach has that potential, I think that's something that folks need to be aware of, and to be sensitive about. And then the second piece is, this one of the biggest challenges to full adoption or full deployment of autonomous vehicles in the US really comes down to public awareness and public acceptance of the technology. Depending upon where you live, it's if you're in the South, if you're the Sun Belt, as we call it, Texas, Florida, in the Southeast, and even in the Southwest, there's a good chance, probably a 10% chance, that you're driving down a major highway, that the truck next to you, is operating in some type of autonomous, there's some type of autonomy there. And the idea that people look up and you see, no driver, that can create some problems. So another issue, I think, is, or concern that I have, is whether or not the focus on this might actually begin to erode public acceptance, and an overall just comfort level with this technology. Not that that should be, should trump in any way these national security concerns that you raise, that are very important. But it's still, just as we're looking at this ecosystem and this nascent technology, and trying to see, to bring it to fruition, because we believe there might be, safety benefits, mobility benefits, all types of, larger advantages. We just have to, I think it's good to flag and to discuss how these types of rules, can impact multiple layers of sort of policy concerns around the deployment of AVs.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of thoughts on this. Earl. You and I have talked about this quite a bit in private, but I want to get back to what clients should really be thinking about
Yeah.
here. Whether or not you can scrub all of these systems from Chinese software or not, that's a question, right? That's a legitimate question. But the notice for proposed rulemaking allows companies to talk about how you mitigate if you cannot, right? And so, but that requires you to really understand what's going into your vehicle. That requires OEMs and others in the software space to really understand that national security, in addition to safety, consumer safety, road safety, national security is something now you are going to have to deal with. You're going to have to be able to talk about, and you can't do that by pretending as though what really matters is just safety, right? You have to say either we can do this without Chinese software, or if we're using Chinese software, that's a big if, I would not suggest that you do.
Yeah.
How are we going to mitigate this? Now, here's something I also want the listeners to understand. When you look at what is required on the data side, the Chinese have a whole fleet of these vehicles also. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to mitigate the same vulnerabilities that the US is trying to mitigate. So always look at what the competitor is trying to do. And so what they say is we have a data security law that allows for a degree of localization. So if you're a foreign company, if you need to test, if you need to try and figure out what software works in the context of China, you can do that, but you're going to have a JV partner, for example. It's a Chinese company. You're going to have to make sure that that data is stored in China, right? Cannot bring that data back to the US. So what the Chinese are trying to do is build an ecosystem of mitigation. And I suspect that in some of these answers that clients could provide in this period, will be some mitigation
Yeah,
answers. But there's one thing here that you and I have talked about that I have to call you on, I have to admit, and that is on this testing of safety
yeah,
issues. I was shocked to learn, and I told you this, that there are Chinese companies on the road right now
yeah,
with no regulation at all that has tested about 450,000
yeah,
miles of California roads. That would never happen in China without regulation. If you're doing that testing at all, and Tesla, we know, is doing some of that testing, and they do it a little bit differently than another American company. But I mean, at some point, there's a reciprocity question that people are asking here. What's your response to people who are shocked to hear that?
yeah. No, I mean that's it is a great it's a great point. It is sort of this shocking reality. It is kind of shocking, as I said. Depending upon where you live in the U.S., you could look up at any time and see a big 18-wheeler, driving down the road without a driver, in some respects. But that number, I should answer this way. One, it is a significant number. But at the same time, there are U.S. companies that have reported 7.1 million miles of testing on U.S. roads. There's a most recent report that says that there's been over 1.5 million miles just in 2023, that where testing has occurred. So the takeaway here is one, AV deployment is happening, and that's why there has to be some sensitivity to it. But at the same time, to your question about just regulations in general, the federal government has not regulated autonomous vehicles in the US. Right now, all of the rules of the road are set by states. So you have, what we call in the legal profession this, patchwork of regulations. Each state comes up with their own approach. You have some states that are leaning in, Texas, for instance, not only encouraging companies to test, are actually giving incentives. Arizona's the same way. California has sort of a little bit of a schizophrenic sort of reality. It's in some respects it's the source of the base of a lot of tech companies, but yet at the same time, the state legislature isn't always that enthused with the technology. So it just depends on the day in California. But no, your point is right on that. We would not see the level of testing across the board in China that you have here in the US. In some respects, I guess that's a good thing, but that also is the reason why now we're doing, the Department of Commerce believes that it needs to set these requirements and these limitations. From a client perspective, you know, I know that here at Hogan Levels, whether it's from our trade group or from our transportation group, we have been advising clients for years that they have to begin to look at the sourcing of their hardware primarily because that's where the focus was. So, in the AV space, LiDAR is extremely important. And the reality is that the vast majority of LiDARs are coming from China. And so we've advised that you've got to start identifying either, allied countries where you can set up manufacturing, or even here in the U.S., you're now seeing greater development of manufacturing of this important hardware here in the U.S. Now the problem is it's going to take time for those supply chains to be mature and to be able to supply at the rate and the volume that's necessary. But yeah, it's going to have to. If this rule moves forward as it's been reported, there's going to have to be a serious look across the industry's OEMs as well as developers as to how they plan not just the initial source code, but sort of what the next generation of it looks like. It's going to have to be, they're going to have to look across the board, just not only today, but in the future.
Yeah, look, I'll say this, and this is borne out based on some of your experience and mine as well in dealing with clients when these sorts of things pop up. And, I learned a valuable lesson with the UFLPA, the Uyghur Forced
Yeah,
Labor Protection Act. And what we found with UFLPA, so this was the US saying you cannot source, you cannot buy, you cannot import any materials produced with slave labor, forced labor, and they're largely thinking about Xinjiang province and northwestern China. And when you really force companies, particularly at the executive level, so CFO, CEO, even board level, to explain their supply chain, what shocked me as I worked with clients on UFLPA was how few people understood the complexity of their supply chain, how few people in these companies that many I represented understood how deeply they were connected to China and how difficult it is to unwind that supply chain. I fear the same thing here. And so what I've been saying to you is we have to let clients know that national security, China in particular, and all of that wrapped into your dealings and doing business with those supply chains, as complex as it is, the US government is going to continue to push for an attempt to either disaggregate or mitigate the risk that they see from Chinese supply chain. So this is the same thing that I saw with UFLPA. And
Yeah.
companies tend to want to stick their head in the sand and pretend like this is not going to happen.
Yeah.
This is going to happen. And you're going to have to understand what goes into your vehicle, where there are security risks that the government has identified, and you're going to have to figure out how to talk about those, mitigate those, address those. And now's a good time to start.
And on that point, as I said, with the NPRM, there is going to be an opportunity for public comment. And, I think your point is well taken. This is not the time, if you're in this sector, this is not the time to stand on the sidelines. This is the time to engage. There is always this tendency to not want to be the one out front, and so I'm sure we're going to see a lot of trade associations that are making points. But the reality is that there are perhaps some common interests. Thus, a trade association is perhaps well positioned to respond. But there are going to be some, unique aspects that I think that companies may want to, should take advantage of and make sure that they are on record as to whatever is unique about their company, and that the impacts that this rule could have on them when it's all said and done with. I was, amazed. I've spent the last 15, 20 years of my career advising companies on the private sector side, to rule proposals coming out of agencies, and having now spent 2.5 years as the regulator on the inside. The thing that was very illuminating to me is that agencies are required to take into account all of the comments that they receive, and if they don't, then it actually makes the rules vulnerable, subject to litigation and challenge. So it is definitely, I think, a worthwhile to have companies to engage and to make sure that Department of Commerce, and if transportation were to get involved, to make sure that they're heard. Before we end, I think that we've
Can I
got
just
to.
say
Oh yeah,
something
sure.
really quickly
Yeah.
on this point? Because I agree with you 100%. And we've both been on both sides of this issue. We've received the comments in agencies. We've helped clients
Yeah.
to really put forth these comments. Look, I am a big fan of companies taking advantage of this public comments period. You and I know the value that brought to clients in the 301 tariff issue. We know the value that brought through the NEVI funding that came out. With respect to China, what the public comments period also provides on the national security side, those watching this with is an understanding that companies understand national security and are taking it serious when they see you engaging in this. And so I say to people all the time, the best thing you can do is to let the government know that you're aware of these issues, that you're not blind to the risk that they laid out, espionage, cyber network attacks. And so by giving a set of carefully thought out comments, it says to those of us on the inside, when we were on the inside, okay, such and such gets it, right? They're
Yeah.
not going to be an unwitting mark of some sort of issue because they are taking this seriously. So I'll stop there, but
No, no, I think
you
you're
know
exactly
how
right.
I feel about
Yeah.
using this process.
Taking advantage of it. And the worst thing that you can do, and we've all seen it, is when companies choose to stay on the sideline and then the rule comes out and then they want to react and they want to respond. And at that point, it's too late. But no, I agree with you. But so I was just going to say, one, there's a very big elephant in the room, an elephant and a donkey. Uh, right
To be
now,
precise.
to be precise, this thing happening in November, the presidential election, and I think that folks, well, one, we'd be remiss if we didn't reflect on, what are the implications of this potential rule, if there's a change in administration. And either way, we know there's going to be a change in administration. Now, whether it's, I think, a President Harris administration, though obviously very aligned with President Biden, there will be some differences. But of course, on the other side, a Trump too will also, represent some unique. They'll have their own take on it. But just, what's your thought as to this rule and what happens come November 5th?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Earl, let me just be clear that unlike the Wage Labor Force Protection Act, which is a law,
Yep.
this is a policy from an administration which is subject to change with the administration. So I think we got to make that point up front. And look, I think that to be fair, most administrations, when they come in and they're dealing with policy proposals or rule proposals from a previous administration, like to go through a review, right? They like to make sure that things are not done to a degree that's either more strict or less strict than they would like. And with China, China's not going to go away as a competitor, as a potential adversary, whether you have a Trump or a Harris administration. So let's be clear. China is still going to be a concern. Where you start to get into differences here may be degree to which they want to imply a rule like this. Do they want to strengthen it? Some people will say that there could be more that we could do here, right? You could see that from the Trump administration. The reality, though, is that what we're talking about now, the security risk behind connected and autonomous vehicles will remain, and we will see some action at some point on these issues. So what do I tell clients? I say very simply, do not use a policy review as an excuse to do nothing. Use it as an opportunity to get prepared because this is not going away, right? There may be a degree of difference, but the reality is China, as far as a national security concern, is going to remain ever present regardless of who's in the White House.
Couldn't agree with you more. The reality is that in the AV space, both the Trump administration, the Trump one administration, and the Biden administration, coming out of both the White House and the Department of Transportation, leaned forward on advancing policy objectives to bring AV vehicles to the road. And so I view that it shows that it's a bipartisan issue. And so just on the pure transportation side of it, I don't think it matters who's in the White House. AV vehicles, their deployment, safety, and all of the other implications that flow are going to continue to be important. At the same time, as you just laid out, the geopolitical threat of China is not going to disappear. And so, if anyone has an idea in their mind that this proposal may find itself on a shelf if there is a Trump 2 administration, I think that they're, kind of fooling themselves. Because at a minimum, we know, as you just laid out, that there's going to be a review of the policy, and if anything, it'll either be expanded or it's going to be narrow. But it's not going to just be put on the shelf yeah, it's not going to go away, no matter how you swing it. And I think in that respect, we're going to have to continue to discuss it, continue to tease out the technical aspects. It's very possible that the AV developers won't have any issue when it comes to removing any potential software challenges. I don't know. there's a lot of on the connectivity side. We know that there's a lot of hardware that is coming, and so that coming from China, and so this is not going to be something that happens without any serious review of supply chains and of technology sources. So we know that that's going to have to happen, when it comes to these, comes to this rule. So
I know we're at time, but as you reference supply chains again,
did you hear that? You didn't hear that, by the way, did you?
I did hear that, but there's one piece of this that I think is important. We've been largely talking about the U.S. and China as though those are the only two countries with large automobile
That's right.
sectors. And what's important to note here, particularly on the national security side, and you probably have some thoughts about this just commercially with respect to transportation, but the administration has been meeting with
Yeah.
allies and partners, like-minded partners. We know about a meeting that took place that included the Japanese, that included the South Koreans, that
The
included
Germans.
Indians, the Germans.
Hmm.
And so, you can't run from this issue by fleeing abroad. And if you're a Korean or Japanese or German company, you can't run from these issues either. These issues are being discussed among allies because this is a global network here with respect to automobiles. These automobiles are on each other's streets, and so these are all concerns. So I just want to make it clear to potential clients who may be listening that there is no shelter from this issue somewhere else. There's a lot of discussions happening among allies and friends about this issue.
That's right. As we said, you can't sit on the sideline, you can't bury your head, or whatever other, analogy you want to use about just ignoring this serious policy issue. And as we are as we are at this initial stage, we're kind of reaching that tipping point of where technology, transportation, mobility, it's all coming together. And we haven't used the words, the two letters AI during our whole discussion, but we know that that's at its core, what this is about. And as a result, because we have this confluence of all of these issues at one time, right now, it's not going to disappear. And, everyone has to have a collective, willingness of engagement, but also, just willingness to understand that, these conversations are gonna continue. So, my friend, I so appreciate this. I hope this is not our last conversation, and that there will be more. But thank you for sharing your thoughts in on this important topic, and look forward to our next discussion.
Well, thank you to you and to Hogan for hosting me in Longview this morning. I thought it was a really good discussion. I hope clients are listening. This is a serious issue, and people should be reaching out to you, trying to figure out how they get engaged in this comments process.
That's right. All right. Thanks a lot. Take care.